What's up everybody, blessed be, my name is Manon and you are watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. This video offers my personal views on the topic at hand. Please visit me on my other platforms as well, including Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon, all links down in the description below. Do you need help with a spell or fancy a tarot reading? Shoot on over to my store, Bewitching and Bizarre, with choices listed down in the description below for your personalized working and or reading. Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough honest conversation, and that's being a solitary practitioner. Not the dramatic version some people imagine, not the lonely stereotype, and definitely not the idea that it's somehow lesser or incomplete. I want to get in deep and look at what solitary practice really is, why so many people are drawn to it, and why it has always been a real and valid way of walking a spiritual path. Whether you're brand new and trying to figure out where you fit, or you've been doing this quietly on your own for years, this conversation is for you. No gatekeeping, no pressure. Just a grounded look at what it means to practice on your own terms and why that can be a powerful thing. Roll intro. Welcome back everybody. Happy New Year as well. Alright. So let's start at the very beginning, because this is where a lot of confusion sneaks in and sets people sideways right out of the gate. When people hear the phrase solitary practitioner, they tend to immediately fill in the blanks themselves, and 9 times out of 10 those blanks are wrong. Some folks hear solitary and they think it means lonely, disconnected, inexperienced, or somehow not doing things the right way. Others hear it and assume it means anti-coven, anti-tradition, or anti-anyone telling you anything at all. Neither of those takes really land where they should. So let me back up a bit and explain what solitary actually means. Being solitary simply means that you practice on your own. That's it. No coven structure guiding your weekly ritual. No initiations being handed down. No group calendar telling you when to show up, what to wear, or what words to say. You are the one doing the work, deciding the pace, and taking responsibility for what you learn and how you apply it. That doesn't make it better or worse, it just makes it different. And here's the part people miss. Solitary does not mean cut off from knowledge, history, or community. You can be solitary and still read books, watch videos, attend open rituals, talk to other witches, or learn from teachers. Solitary doesn't mean you're locked in a room doing spells in secret like some misunderstood movie character. It means you don't belong to a formal group structure that dictates your practice. Another big misconception is that solitary practice is some kind of beginner phase, like training wheels, so to speak, as if everyone starts solitary and eventually graduates into a coven. That idea just isn't true. Some people do move from solitary work into group practice, like myself for instance, but others stay solitary for their entire lives and build incredibly deep, serious, powerful practices. Solitary isn't a stepping stone unless you decide it is. Now let's talk about why people choose this path, because it's rarely random. Some people live in areas where there just isn't a coven nearby. Some have jobs, families, or responsibilities that make rigid schedules unrealistic. Others value privacy. And some people, this is very important, simply function better when they're not filtering their spirituality through group dynamics, politics, or personalities. That doesn't make them difficult or antisocial, it makes them honest about how they learn and grow. There's also a level of personal accountability that comes with solitary work that a lot of folks don't realize until they're actually in it. When you're solitary, there's no one to lean on when things don't make sense. No one to correct you in the moment. No one to tell you this is how it's always been done. That can be uncomfortable, but it can also be incredibly grounding. You learn to question yourself. You learn discernment. You learn to slow down and think instead of copying. At the same time, solitary doesn't mean chaotic. It doesn't mean you just make everything up as you go along with no consistency or thought. That's another myth. A solid solitary practice still has structure. It still has study, repetition, reflection, and growth. The difference is that you build that structure instead of inheriting it. And here's something I really want to drive home. Solitary practice is not lesser, watered down, or incomplete. It is not Wicca light. It's not pretend witchcraft. Historically, most people practiced privately or within small family lines long before formal groups became more common. Solitary work isn't new, it's actually quite ancient. Now, does solitary practice have challenges? Absolutely. You don't have built-in validation. You don't have elders watching over your shoulder. You don't have instant answers. But those challenges also sharpen your awareness and force you to engage with your path instead of coasting on someone else's authority. So when we say like solitary practitioner, what we really are talking about is someone who takes ownership of their spiritual life. Someone who learns, experiments, reflects, and grows without outsourcing that responsibility. That doesn't make them rebellious, it makes them intentional. And once you understand that, the word solitary stops sounding so lonely and starts sounding empowered instead. Alright, so now that we've cleared up what being solitary actually means, let's talk about the part that tends to trip people up the most. How do you walk your own path without getting lost? Because freedom sounds great, and it is, but freedom without direction can turn into confusion pretty damn fast. When you're in a coven or a formal group, a lot of structure's already baked in. Someone tells you when ritual is. Someone hands you material to study. Someone sets expectations. When you're solitary, none of that exists unless you create it. And that's where a lot of people either thrive or quietly drift away into the sunset. Let me explain what I mean. Walking your own path doesn't mean doing whatever feels good in the moment and hoping it turns into something meaningful later. That's not spiritual freedom, that's just spiritual wandering. A solitary path still needs intention, it still needs consistency, and it still needs some kind of compass, even if that compass is something you build yourself over time. One of the biggest mistakes I see solitaires make early on is confusing independence with randomness. They'll read a book here, try a spell there, change deities every few weeks, and jump from system to system without ever letting anything sink in. And then they wonder why nothing feels deep or stable. It's not because they're solitary, it's because there's no thread tying their practice together. Structure doesn't have to be rigid, it doesn't have to be ceremonial, it just has to be intentional. Something as simple as saying, this is what I'm focusing on this season, or for instance, these are the practices I'm committing to for the next few months, can make a massive difference. You don't need a hierarchy, you just need direction. Another thing that matters a lot here is honesty. When there's no one watching, it's easy to slack off, cut corners, or convince yourself you're progressing when you're really just circling the same ideas. Solitary practice demands self-awareness. You have to be willing to ask yourself hard questions. Am I actually practicing or just consuming content? Am I growing or just staying comfortable? And yeah, that can feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is often where the real work starts. One of the strengths of the solitary path is that you're not forced into a pace that doesn't fit you. You're not rushing through material just to keep up. You can slow down, revisit concepts, and let things unfold naturally. But slowing down doesn't mean stopping altogether. There's a difference between moving at your own speed and standing still. This is where routines come in, not strict schedules, but rhythms, daily grounding, weekly reflection, monthly goals, something that gives your practice a pulse. Over time, those small habits add up to something solid, and the best part, you can adjust them as your life changes without asking permission. Another trick of the trade is learning how to trust yourself without inflating your ego. When you're solitary, there's no external authority validating your experiences. That can be very scary at first, but it's also empowering. You learn to listen. You learn how to make wise decisions. You learn that not every thought is a message and not every feeling is a sign. That kind of balance takes time, and it's earned through reflection, not fantasy. And let's be clear, walking your own path doesn't mean rejecting all guidance. Books, teachers, history, and shared wisdom still matter. The difference is that you're not handing over your agency. You're learning with the material, not submitting to it blindly. You're allowed to question, you're allowed to pause, you're allowed to say this doesn't fit me without any kind of spiritual guilt. That's the heart of solitary practice. It's not about isolation, it's about responsibility. You're the one steering. You're the one choosing what stays and what goes. And over time, that builds confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing where you're headed. Walking your own path isn't about never getting lost. It's about learning how to find your way back when you do. So now let's talk about what ritual and actual practice look like when you're working alone. No circle of people, no shared script, no one across from you lighting candles or calling quarters, just you, your space, and whatever it is you're doing. And here's the first thing I want to say. Working alone does not mean your practice is weaker. In a lot of cases, it's the opposite. When you're solitary, everything in ritual runs through you. The focus, the intention, the energy, the follow through. There's no background noise, no waiting for someone else to finish their part, no adjusting your flow to match the group. That can make solitary ritual feel more direct and more personal, even if it looks simpler on the surface. A lot of people get hung up on what ritual is supposed to look like. They picture long scripts, fancy tools, and perfectly timed movements. And sure, that stuff can be meaningful, but it's not the heart of the work. Ritual is really about consistency and intention. Doing something with purpose in a deliberate way again and again. That's what turns an action into a practice. When you're solitary, ritual often starts simple. Lighting a candle, saying a few words, sitting in silence, grounding, maybe centering. Those basics matter more than people think. They build familiarity. They train your focus. Over time, those small acts create a rhythm, and that rhythm becomes powerful because it's yours. Spell work follows the same idea. You don't need elaborate setups for things to work. You need clarity. You need follow through. You need to know what you're asking for and why. One of the advantages of solitary work is that there's no pressure to perform. You're not doing magic for an audience. You're doing it because it needs to be done. And that brings up something important. Results don't come from complexity. They come from repetition, attention, and honesty. Doing one spell 100 different ways usually teaches you less than doing one practice consistently and watching how it unfolds over time. Solitary practitioners learn this pretty quickly because there's no one else to blame when things feel scattered. Meditation and energy work also tend to deepen when you're alone. There's no comparison, no wondering if you're doing it right based on how someone else experiences things. You learn your own signals, your own limits, your own tells. That kind of self-awareness doesn't come from reading. It comes from paying attention. Another thing worth mentioning is tools. Solitary practice often strips tools down to what's actually useful, not because tools are bad, but because you start noticing which ones you actually connect with. One tool you use all the time is more meaningful than a shelf full of items you'd never touch. Over time, your tools become familiar, almost like extensions of habit rather than accessories. Now let's talk about consistency, because this is where solitary work either solidifies or falls apart. You don't need to practice every day. You don't need to do big rituals all the time. What you do need is regular engagement, checking in, reflecting, keeping a record. Even something as simple as journaling after a working can help you notice patterns in growth you'd otherwise miss. And yes, solitary ritual can evolve. What starts as quiet candle work might grow into full seasonal rites. What begins as simple grounding might turn into deeper trance or spirit work. That evolution happens naturally when you stay present and patient instead of rushing towards intensity. One last thing, and this really matters. A solitary practice works best when you stop trying to impress imaginary critics. There's no scorecard, no purity test, no gold star for doing things the right way, so to speak. The work is between you and whatever you're engaging with. When that sinks in, ritual stops feeling performative and starts feeling real. Solitary ritual isn't about doing more. It's about doing what you do with intention, awareness, and consistency. And when those three line up, even the simplest acts can carry real weight. So now we're stepping into one of the most personal parts of solitary practice, relationships with the gods, spirits, ancestors, and whatever else you work with without a middleman. No priest, no coven leader, no one translating experiences for you or telling you what something has to mean. Just you and the relationship itself. And for a lot of people, this is both exciting and intimidating both. When you're a part of a group, spiritual authority is often shared or handed down. Someone explains the gods, someone defines the rules, someone tells you what's valid and what's not. In solitary practice, that structure disappears. That doesn't mean authority vanishes. It means it lands squarely on your shoulders, and that's a big shift. Let me be clear about something right away. Working without a middleman does not mean you suddenly become the ultimate authority on everything spiritual. It means you become responsible for how you interpret, question, and integrate your experiences. There's a difference. One is grounded, the other is pure ego. And solitaries have to learn that difference fast. When you're alone in your practice, experiences can feel more intense because there's no external filter. A dream, a sign, a feeling during ritual, it all lands directly with you. That can be meaningful, but it can also be misleading if you're not careful. Not every strong experience is a message. Not every coincidence is communication. Knowing the difference becomes a survival skill, not an optional add-on. This is where a lot of mature solitary practitioners slow things down instead of rushing to conclusions. You learn to sit with experiences instead of immediately labeling them. You ask questions, you watch patterns, you wait to see what repeats instead of reacting to the first emotional hit. That patience keeps you grounded and prevents fantasy from running the show. Now let's talk about gods and spirits specifically. Some solitaires work with named deities, others work with broader forces, ancestors, or land spirits. Some don't personify anything at all. There's no single right approach here, and that's important to understand. Solitary practice allows for relationships to develop organically instead of being assigned. But organic doesn't mean careless. Respect, consistency, and boundaries still matter. Without a middleman, your relationship is built through time and interaction, not titles or claims. You don't need to announce that a deity chose to justify a connection. You don't need dramatic language to make something real. Quiet, steady engagement often tells you more than big declarations ever will. Another thing to learn here is responsibility. When there's no authority figure, there's also no one to blame if things go sideways. If you misunderstand something, that's on you to unpack. If you rush ahead, you deal with the consequences. That might sound harsh, but it is also empowering. You're not outsourcing your spiritual life to someone else's framework. That said, solitary doesn't mean rejecting shared knowledge. History, myth, and other people's experiences still matter. The difference is how you use them. Instead of treating them as rules, you treat them as context. You learn with the material, not under it. That balance keeps your practice rooted instead of floating off into speculation. One of the biggest traps solitaries fall into is mistaking personal experience for universal truth. Just because something feels real to you doesn't mean it applies to everyone else. Mature solitary work includes humility. You learn to say, "This is how it works for me," without needing to convince anyone else. And honestly, that humility strengthens your relationships with whatever you're working with. When you're not trying to impress or improve anything, communication becomes clearer, expectations soften. The work becomes less about control and more about connection. Working without a middleman doesn't make your path chaotic or unsafe. It makes it honest. If you're willing to stay grounded, question yourself, and take responsibility for what you experience. That's not always easy, but it builds something solid over time. At its core, solitary spiritual authority isn't about power over others. It's about accountability to yourself. And once you understand that, your relationship stops feeling performative and starts feeling real. Okay, so let's zoom out and talk about the long game, because this is where a lot of people start asking the real questions. What does solitary practice actually look like over time? Not just the exciting beginning, not just the experimenting phase, but years down the road. What holds up and what starts to wear thin? Being solitary has some real strengths, and there's no point pretending otherwise. One of the biggest is freedom. You decide what your practice looks like. You adjust when life changes. You don't have to step away entirely just because you can't meet someone else's expectations or schedule. That flexibility keeps many people practicing when they might otherwise burn out or walk away completely. Another strength is depth. Solitary practitioners often go deep instead of wide. You spend more time with fewer practices, fewer ideas, fewer symbols. Over time, that creates familiarity. You stop guessing, you stop overthinking. You learn what works for you because you've tested it slowly and consistently. That kind of depth doesn't always happen in group settings where the focus has to stay shared. There's also a strong sense of ownership that develops. When your practice succeeds, you know why. When it stalls, you can usually trace it back to something specific. There's no confusion about who's steering the ship. That builds confidence. Again, not the loud kind, but the steady kind that doesn't need approval. But let's be honest. Solitary practice comes with challenges, and ignoring them doesn't make them go away. One of the biggest is isolation. Even people who enjoy being alone can feel disconnected over time. Not having anyone to talk things through with, especially during confusing or intense periods, can make you second guess yourself. That's where many solitaires either stagnate or quietly drift off without realizing it's happening. Another challenge is doubt. When there's no external feedback, it's easy to wonder if you're doing anything at all. Are your experiences meaningful? Are you growing or just repeating habits? That kind of doubt isn't a flaw, it's a part of the solitary path. The issue is whether you engage with it honestly or let it shut you down. Burnout is another real concern. When everything rests on you, motivation can dip. Life happens, energy drops, and without shared responsibility, it can be tempting to put practice off indefinitely. Long-term solitaires learn how to work with those cycles instead of fighting them. Sometimes that means simplifying, sometimes it means resting without guilt. Now, here's something important that doesn't get said enough. Being solitary doesn't mean being permanently alone. Many long-term solitaires still connect with community in loose ways. Online spaces, open rituals, occasional gatherings, learning from others without surrendering autonomy. Solitary isn't isolation by default, it's independence with choice. When I lived back in Florida and I was part of CUPS, the Universalist Unitarian Pagan group, Everybody that went to that, which was at times, 100 people showing up for a gathering, the large percentage of the people there were actually solitary, but they kept in connection with others and the local groups, which was healthy for them. And for some people, solitary practice changes over time, not because they failed at it, but because they grew. Some join covens later, some form small working partnerships, others stay solitary forever. None of those outcomes are better than the others. The path isn't linear, and it doesn't need to be. What really matters in the long run is honesty. Are you still engaged? Are you still curious? Are you adapting instead of forcing yourself to stay the same? A solitary path only becomes stagnant when you stop paying attention. There's also a quiet strength that comes with long-term solitary work. You stop chasing validation. You stop comparing. You trust your pace. You know when to push and when to pause. That kind of steadiness isn't flashy, but it lasts. So the reality of solitary practice isn't constant inspiration or nonstop growth. It's cycles, plateaus, breakthroughs, quiet periods, and learning to stay present through all of it. Solitary practice isn't easier, it's just honest about where the work actually happens. And for those who stick with it, it becomes less about proving anything and more about living the path in a way that fits your life, your limits, and your truth. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from all of this, it's that being a solitary practitioner isn't a compromise, it's a choice. It's a path built on awareness, responsibility, and knowing yourself well enough to trust your own pace. Solitary work isn't about doing less or cutting corners. It's about engaging honestly with your practice, whether that means quiet rituals, deep reflection, or simply showing up again after life pulls you in another direction. You don't need permission to walk this path, and you don't need validation for it to be real. The work counts because you're doing it. When it's all said and done, solitary practice is about relationship with your beliefs, your experiences, and your growth over time. It asks you to listen, adjust, and stay curious instead of chasing labels or approval. Some people will stay solitary forever, others won't, and both outcomes are fine. What matters is that your practice feels honest and alive instead of forced. If you're still learning, questioning, and showing up in your own way, then you're doing it right. And that quiet, steady kind of dedication, that's what actually lasts. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witch into Working. Are you a solitary practitioner? Do you have any tips or tricks for others who want to walk the solitary path? Let us all know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to ring that little bell to be reminded of the wonderful and exciting future episodes to come. I love you guys and gals. Blessed be.